Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Good evening, and welcome to a special meeting of the governing body to discuss the ongoing budget process. If we can call this meeting to order, we'll stand and have a pledge of allegiance, and then we'll do the roll call. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Kelly, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Padilla,
Here.
Council Members Hiller,
Here.
Valdivia Acala,
Here.
Ortiz, Emerson,
Here.
Kell,
Here.
Nager, here, Dobler,
Here.
Duncan, Duncan? Not yet.
Deputy Mayor, are you there?
And Councilmember Lesser.
Here.
In the dark.
We have 8 present.
Thank you. We'll move on now to the agenda, and the second item is non-action items, discussion of the operating budget. City Manager?
This will be our first meeting on the budget. We'll start with presentations. First, I will turn it over to our Finance Director, Mr. Steve Wade.
Thank you, City Manager. Mr. Mayor. So you have an agenda in front of you, a schedule for tonight. Depending on how we progress tonight, will determine whether or not we go any farther. So we have on your calendars on August 23 reserved for a second special session. It would be our goal and to keep you from having to do that. And so as permits, we'll get through this a little quicker, Mr. Mayor. Maybe tackle a couple extra departments if it allows. I also know that you have other items on tonight, and so we'll just have to see how things go. But what I would like to do is turn to a slide here as we start from last week. And this is for just a reminder for everybody here tonight, as well as for folks at home. If you are at home and you would like to follow along in the budget book, if you go to topeka.org/finance/budget, you'll be able to call up the 2023 budget. If you're looking at it through a browser, please remember that your page numbers on your browser will be 3 pages ahead of what they are in the book. If you download the document, it'll be the same, but if we're referring to page 10, it'll be page 13 on your browser. So the slide in front of you right now is, again, a reminder from our last session. When we talk about the general fund, there had been some discussions as far as where are we trending on growth as compared to the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation is in blue. I'm sorry, the rate of inflation is in yellow. The general fund growth is in blue. And so you can see through the years on the screen that the general fund has been at or below the rate of inflation. And so I just wanted to tee that up tonight before we jump into our first department. Our first department tonight will be the police department. One of the things you're going to hear as a recurring theme throughout this evening and throughout the coming weeks is a reference to a budgeted increase for non-union management exec personnel. Governing body, I believe that you are aware that over the last several months, we have worked with a consultant to analyze market rates for salaries. Those results have come back in. There'll be a deeper presentation on that for the governing body on the 9th of August. But those results basically suggest that a pool of 10% be set aside for budget moving forward. I stress the word pool. It is not per person. It is also not per department. It is a pool that can be distributed with governing bodies, obviously, approval when it comes forward to budget, to positions that are undercompensated as compared to peer organizations. Again, we'll get deeper into that on the 9th of August, but as you hear the recurring theme tonight about a 10% adjustment, that's where that's coming from. Again, that is not on a person-by-person basis. It is a pool. There are some positions, such as engineering, that may see a larger increase as opposed to some positions that may already be at market rate. But I wanted to tee that up before we move into discussion on the police department. Adam Bond tonight will be your tour guide, and so it's all yours.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, governing body. Last week's conversation, we talked a lot about, this is not working. Excuse us 1 second. Okay, perfect, sorry. Okay. Last week's discussion, we talked a lot about the different key indicators that we're going to use to measure our long-term outcomes. So before we get into the departments, there's a couple slides that show each of the measurements that we'll be using for our long-term outcomes. We won't spend too much time on these slides. When we continue the outcome-based budgeting process, we'll spend a lot of time looking at these measurements at the beginning of the budget process, where we talk about what strategies we'll use to improve the measurements that we're looking at. And again, this is just a representation on this slide that just has a couple of the different services that fall into our public safety category. So our first key indicator was increased sustainability of operations for public safety. The measurements that we're looking at is the police and fire vacancy rate, along with the fire protection class rating and the police department accreditation. The other thing to note when we're looking at these measurements is that they may change a little bit and we may add more measurements as well. There's a couple that were talked about that we aren't measuring currently. But again, with all of these measurements, we're looking at the trends so that each budget cycle, we can talk about what strategies we need to employ to be able to improve the trends of these long-term outcomes. This next one, enhanced community engagement programs. We have our Clean Slate Day attendees and the number of smoke alarms installed. Ensure appropriate response and resolutions. The measurements were violent crimes, code violations corrected by owner, and property crimes. And finally, foster partnerships to provide wraparound services. We have a number of victim services referrals and number of defendants enrolled in alternative sentencing court. So again, those are the measurements that we'll be using for each of our key indicators. And we'll talk more about them at the beginning of each budget cycle to talk about how to improve them. So now as we get into the police department, if you'll turn to page 97 in your budget books, I'll just do a quick overview of the finances in the police department. So again, that's page 97 in your budget books. So the police department's overall budget is $45.2 million. This is a 5% increase from the 2022 budget. Of the $45.2 million, 83% is personnel costs. The personnel costs increased about $1 million from 2022. For union positions, this was an average increase of about 4.65%. And as Steve mentioned, the non-union positions includes a 10% increase. Commodities increased about $750,000 or 54% from 2022. This is primarily driven by two items. One being the body-worn cameras, which has previously been paid out of the general fund non-departmental that is now in the police department's budget. And the other item is increases in fuel costs. Contractual increased by about $344,000 from 2022. This is primarily inflationary increases and increases in internal service fees in our fleet and IT departments. The FTE allocation is 366 full-time equivalent positions, which is up from 361 in 2022, so 5 position increase. 3 of those positions are building security officers that have been a contractual expense in the budget that are now employees. And the other positions are the Quartermaster and the Grand Jury Coordinator. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Wheelis.
Good evening, Mayor, governing body. I just want to talk a little bit more specifics, not only to educate the governing body, but also the viewers at home in regards to the FTE additions. For those that aren't aware, starting with the 3 building security officers, we transitioned, those are security officers at the Holiday Building and City Hall, and they transitioned from a private security company to now city employees. Why that was a good decision was because it enhanced accountability. It brought the operational responses of those employees in line with city policies and training with the police department. They report to the TPD court security chain of command, and they have direct radio contact with that chain of command if there's issues at either one of those buildings. And obviously the municipal court personnel are in that same building. So it's a very good, efficient response, and it's a higher level of policy oversight and training for those employees. On to the Quartermaster, a brief explanation about what the Quartermaster job is for those people that don't know it. The primary responsibility is the ordering, tracking, and dissemination to department employees of all equipment, clothing, gear, etc. Originally, that position was staffed by a police sergeant. It is now a civilian position. That sergeant was placed back into the field operations division to address the vacancies that we'll talk about in just a minute. The Grand Jury Coordinator, primary jury job responsibility is district court case presentations to the grand jury to start the criminal prosecution process. That was staffed by a sworn detective. It is now staffed by a civilian. That detective was placed back into the Criminal Investigations Bureau to help address the vacancies. The current vacancies at the police department, 32 sworn positions, 30 officers and 2 detectives, and 6 non-sworns as of 7/25 of 22, which that's kind of a moving target depending on day to day. Any questions on that so far? Go ahead.
I have questions, Chief, on the positions, on the vacancies. The information that I received, it says that there are currently 38 vacant.
That's sworn and civilian.
Sworn and civilian.
So the breakdown is 32 sworn, 30 officers, 2 detectives, and then 6 non-sworn or civilian vacancies for a total of 38.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of fuzzy there. And an estimated savings of 2.5 million. And so that is how much is in the vacancy fund. Is that how I'm supposed to understand that?
I'll let finance talk to you about that.
Okay.
So, Councilwoman, we budget as every year a vacancy credit. This year, that credit was a little over $800,000 for 2022. Given the rate of vacancies that we've incurred through year to date, we're on pace to have a total savings of a little over $2 million in personnel expected for the year.
By the end of the year.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's where that comes from. So we're right now at $817,071,
That's
give or
what,
take.
that's what was budgeted. We're currently running about $1.2 million under budget on personnel year to date.
Oh, okay, got it. And then you anticipate the vacancy credit for 2023 is 1.2 million.
Yes,
Will be
ma'am,
one-
that's what we have budgeted.
Okay.
At current rates, we expect that we'll exceed that.
Okay. Back to Chief, though, I do have a question. I asked for some information because I'm trying to get a bearing on what we have right now. We're looking at the budget, so these questions would make sense in a budgetary conversation. I see that there are 267, I've been quoted, that are on staff at Topeka Police Department now. That was the information I was given. Is that correct?
Yes.
200, okay.
You're
And
talking
so-
about sworn personnel.
Sworn, yes. And when we go down the list, we have one position, I asked for the breakdown, 1 chief, 1 deputy chief, 3 majors, 4 captains, 14 lieutenants, 41 sergeants, 36 detectives, and 167 officers. So are the 167 officers, are those the ones that, the best way I know how to phrase it, are on the streets, in the cars, going through neighborhoods, doing patrols, et cetera?
That is one of the functions. I mean, school resource officers are also officers, task force officers are also officers, community police officers, whether you define community police officers as on the street or not. So we have that breakdown available for you and can provide it to you later, but I thought you meant just a rank breakdown.
Okay, so SROs then are part of that 100
Officers.
period.
Right.
And all of these others that are listed, which would be about 100, that I don't know if this is all considered supervisory, from the chief down to the detectives, are they also on patrol or on the street, or is their job to be in the office?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a layered question, but first of all, to answer this, the easiest part first, detectives are not part of a supervisory, they investigate cases. So they are on the street when they're investigating cases, which, is a percentage of the time. And they're in the office when they're investigating cases in that part of it. So detectives are not supervisors, they are case-working detectives for anything else as far as that goes. Some of the sergeants are supervising on the street in field operations. There's a sergeant, for example, we used the SROs. There is a sergeant over the SROs as well. So the sergeant level is the beginning of the supervisory, and the breakdown is the sergeant is the highest union position, and then the lieutenant is the starting point of the executive management. But the lieutenants on each shift, first, second, and third, there are 2 lieutenants on each shift that are on the street. They are the watch commanders over the troops, the sergeants, and the officers who are on the street. So it is a very specific position by position description as far as that goes. But on the street, at one point or another, I'm on the street sometimes. So, I guess that's what I would say to you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that people, I've been getting questions about if there may be a little bit of heaviness in the police department currently, and then wanting an extra, having openings for 38 additional vacancies. The information I was given is that it's about 2 per 1,000 citizens. I'm just horrific at math, but I think that would be about, for a population, I think we're about at 124, maybe 125, that'd be about 248. We now have 267, correct me if I'm wrong, I definitely could be. We are allotted 299, but then there is that move to keep those vacancies open. So I guess the concern I have is that how do we rank nationally with comparable cities with the size of our police force? Additionally, if crime in the reports that are coming out all over the place in media, that the crime has gone down, why would we need more police? And it got me to thinking and also talking with people in community about the BHU unit. And I have questions about that is to try to get an understanding about where exactly it sits in the budget, given what I was able to get off of the city website and also the information that I asked the city manager. There is a great concern that of having police involved in mental health crisis, and that's what the BHU is made up of, to my understanding. So as we're starting to talk about the budget, and one of the things that I will be looking at, just to be transparent for folks that are watching and that I have been talking to along with you, is that we know that these mental health issues that are just continuing to rise in our community, at least I see it, a continuation of it in District 2. To me, if I was an officer, that would be just an additional stressor, something that I didn't necessarily sign up for, the mental health component. So when I'm going to be looking at the budget that we are going to be discussing, I'm going to be looking at what could the possibilities be about the separation of the behavioral health unit or the mental health component and give it over, whether we third party it out or however that case would be, over to folks or an organization, an entity that could handle this, take that stressor off of PD and get that sometimes escalating, like we've seen in the case with so far of what I've been able to see from the killing of Christopher Kelly and BHU. No one was able to come out because no one was on duty. These stressors continue to build and build in this realm, and it makes a certain sense to look at the possible separation. And I just want you to know that's one of the things I'm going to be asking more about. Also on August 16th, so folks will know that are watching, there's going to be a presentation of the behavioral health unit as an arm of the Topeka Police Department, and I would encourage anybody to attend that meeting or have any questions, call whoever your representative is. But I think that, to me, it seems like it makes sense, again, to take that stressor off of PD. They are not mental health professionals. They are not trained for mental health. They get 40 hours basic course training. And it does look to me, I don't know if that 40 hours, it happens every year, if it's updated every year, or how does that work?
The basic course that you're talking about is the initial academy class. There is ongoing continuing education hours in the mental health field, but the 40-hour class I believe you're referring to is the initial one.
Is it 40 hours a year that they get?
We are required, I guess the answer to that is the state of Kansas requires that we have a minimum of 40 hours of continuing education. I think your question is it 40 hours of mental health training solely? That is not correct. There is ongoing mental health training, but it's not the entirety of the 40 hours that's required by the state of Kansas for law
Any
enforcement.
average hour that you can give?
I would have to get that number for you.
I would appreciate it. But I will have questions. I'm just going to wait until later and probably more about the time on the presentation. But I thank you for your information.
Councilman Kell?
Of the current officers we have, what is the ones that are going to hit the minimum retirement age in the next 2 years?
I can get that number for you. That's not one I know right off the top of my head, but we can definitely give you that number. Over the next 2 years, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I just look at that as a way of turnover and getting people in training, getting on the job.
Well,
as other people are leaving, now you're kind of
Sure.
you're not just sliding new people into a job with no one, kind of replacing someone. So
Yeah, just to be clear, what we can give you is the people who are eligible for retirement. It's hard to say who's actually going to be retired because,
exactly.
I mean, I'm eligible for retirement, still here, so.
At least gives us an idea, because like I said, with the 38 vacancies, it looks, you don't want to have 10 people leave and have sorry. Yes.
I share your concern about the 38 vacancies at the police department.
So, like I say, I always like that, almost like trickle in as they trickle out kind of thing.
Something that we very much pay attention to
Yeah.
year to year.
All right, thank you.
Next slide. So we'll go through some programming highlights and some goals, and I'll follow in general with the slide, but I think you all know me enough by now that I'll go a little bit off too. But the first program highlight that we wanted to talk about was the active bystandership for law enforcement program. I know that the council's very aware of this program, but for the general public, a little background. It's an implemented program at the Topeka Police Department that was founded in Georgetown University. It formalizes a culture of peer intervention and accountability. Peer supervisor intervention requirement is reinforced in a multitude of department policies. We have annual mandatory training on the ABLE program for all sworn personnel at the police department, and TPD currently has 4 certified ABLE instructors. The next program highlight that we wanted to talk about was crime focus areas. Bi-weekly command staff meetings are held where we review crime statistics and trends. We make the decision based on those meetings and the trends and the statistical data about where we put our resources as far as manpower and investigative tools and technology, which we'll talk about later. Based on the current geographic crime concentrations in the city and the trends of specific patterns, that allows us to be very flexible and adjust to the crime that goes on in the city as it moves through the different parts of the year. It's proven to be a very effective tool for crime reduction and public safety enhancement, and we use a similar statistical model for traffic safety enforcement initiatives, which we've done several of this summer as well. Community police officers is always a big program highlight and covers a lot of ground, and actually we'll have 2 different sections where we talk about this as we move through. But some high points that I wanted to talk about with community police officers: back into the Neighborhood Improvement Association meetings, including myself. I consider myself to be the top community police officer at some level, as the mayor is very fond of saying. All of the police officers at the Topeka Police Department are community police officers. And I believe that, and so I put them back into the NIAs, and I'm back out at the NIAs as well. I've attended several, and I plan on attending several more. I believe at a core level that grassroots neighborhood level communication is the key to addressing crime and quality of life challenges specific to each area and neighborhood of the city, which are very unique and very different. There are crime trends that go across the city, but there are very specific issues specific to neighborhoods, and a lot of times the people that live in the neighborhoods are the only ones who know about those issues, especially when it comes to quality of life challenges beyond just crime. We want to talk a little bit about code violations too, voluntary compliance, and that includes code violations. There's been a lot of talk about property maintenance. That also includes animal control section, which is under the police department. We have an added emphasis on community education and conversation, again, as continuing topic of the community knows, and the Neighborhood Improvement Association knows the issues that are going on in their neighborhood. That includes code violations and animal control issues. The council has been a lead on this, and there's been a lot of conversation about the culture change initiatives that are underway, with more to come. So I won't burn a lot of my time talking about that, because I know it's been discussed and will continue to be discussed. Performance and goals is a big thing that we look at the police department, measurables, and especially as we enter into this new budget process and cycle that's about performance-based goals, et cetera. The recognized national industry performance standard for law enforcement agencies is the clearance rates. And some statistical data to highlight where we're at in regards to that is in 2020, the national United States clearance rate for homicide dropped to 50%. That was the first time ever that it had been that low. By comparison, and as a way to show that we continue to buck the national trend as far as crime going down in Topeka, and where it goes up a lot of places all around the country. When they were at some of those all-time lows nationally in 2020, the Topeka homicide clearance rate, and the clearance rate is if the crime was solved, was 92%. In 2021, it was 93%, and in 2022 to date, it's at 88%. We've cleared 7 of 8 homicides that have occurred. So I use the homicide rate statistic just to show where we at on clearance rates. We will continue, we have for a long time, and we will continue to compared using clearance rates, national averages, but we usually fare very well in those categories, especially in the violent crime categories. Crime reduction, as a goal, near and dear to my heart. It's the top priority of my police department. I've made no secret of that when I took over as the interim and then eventually became the permanent chief. I think it should be the top priority of a police department. 2021, as I know many people have heard me say in different venues all over the city, we had a 3-year low on shootings, a 5-year low on homicides, and crime down in property, person, and overall categories across the board. At the mid-year report that Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala referred to and that has been covered widely by media locally and at different community events that I've been to, mid-year report, we're even trending even lower in 22 than we were in the record-setting years of 21. I'm very happy with where we're at, violent crime, but I'm also very cautious because we still have a significant portion of the year to go. But we're trending in the right direction, continuing that trend that some people thought was a one-year fluke. We're building on that. It's fantastic work by the police department personnel, coupled with the great community-wide assistance and support that we enjoy here in the capital city. And then we'll circle back around again. You give me just a few more minutes here to talk about community outreach. And I think this is the important piece that needs to be covered, and probably not going to do it justice because I had to size it down and pick just a few things of all the things that we do in the community outreach. And I think it kind of specifically answers some of the questions that you were talking about. The crime reduction is going down. To make the equation that we don't need those vacant officer spots filled because crime is going down, I think doesn't really give the full weight to all of the reasons why crime goes down. And I think the community outreach and community trust building is a big piece of that. And so I want to spend the next few minutes talking about what the police department does in those areas and how important that is, because when those vacancies get high, those are the areas that officers get pulled, because the basic functions of any police departments are field operations and investigations. Community outreach and those other programs are what gets pulled in to the void when we get too far down on numbers. So just throwing that out there. Community outreach examples that I wanted to highlight, some broad categories and some things I'm very proud of. Youth outreach, Boys and Girls Club this summer, we had a leadership academy. It was the second or third year in a row where our school resource officers taught life skills to teenagers. It was on our social media and it was even covered by local media, and it's a really great partnership that we enjoy. And it continues that mentor relationship between SROs and the teenage group in this community that I think is kind of in between some of the services that we have, and such an important thing to do. So it's really a great program. And if you haven't seen on our social media coverage, you might want to look that one up because it's pretty good. This summer we had the 13th annual Explorers, Topeka Police Department Explorers competition, which is 14 to 21-year-old youth in our community. They held and staffed and participated in a Explorers competition June 25th and 26th this year. 16 teams from 11 states as far away as New Mexico all participated. It has become one of the things in the Explorer, Police Department Explorer world. Topeka is one of the leaders in the forefront for these national competitions. And it's really a good outreach for building community trust with that same age group, 14 to 21. We have youth outreach. We have a number of sports programs, basketball clinics, the Police Athletic League, the Boxing 3-Shield program, the I Can Bite Capper Foundation. I could go on in regards to the sports programs and the youth outreach that we have in those particular areas, but I wanted to highlight a few of those. Now, we always talk about youth outreach programs, and I've heard this from community members, and that is an easy piece. That's a great piece for us in the community. It's a great piece for us at the police department, but it is an easy piece. I also want to talk about the other community outreach pieces that we put in place and that I think have contributed to the continuing downturn of crime. It's not just the field operations and the investigations, but these community partnerships and the communication that results from them also results in reduced crime and public safety enhancement, which is the primary mission of the police department. We've had a number of business outreach programs in that have been very successful. In NOTO, First Friday Art Walk, we have commanders. We've also augmented visibility patrol using the VIPS program and the community police officers for those events and around those general areas, and we've gotten some really good feedback from all levels of that. Downtown events, Tap That Topeka and different Evergy Plaza events through the entire summer. That has now started to become what we all thought it was going to be prior to COVID. And it's become a destination location and an event. And we have staffed and augmented visibility patrols in the lunch hour for the concert series and for the evening events and even for the fountain events to ensure that people feel safe and secure in those destinations. And we've got a lot of good feedback from those as well. But we've also had our TPD staff meetings of senior staff out in the community at local parks, which we've covered on our Facebook and our social media stuff. But not only were we out in the community as the leaders of the police department, but in those different venues, we reached out to community leaders. In other words, when we were in NOTO, we had Director Tom Underwood from the NOTO program who addressed the senior staff. We also had LaManda Broyles from the Topeka Rescue Mission when we were up at NOTO on a separate location. We had CEO Pavarnik Matt Pavarnik from GTP address senior staff when we were out at the Evergy Plaza. And then, of course, we had Trey George from the Topeka Housing Authority give us a presentation on the Pine Ridge Prep Academy. It's important to me that my staff and I are seen out in the community for these meetings that we have. I think it's an important piece, but it's also important to continue to build these public and private partnerships with different programs or different organizations that are in those locations when we're out there. It's not just a photo opportunity for us out in the park. It is about understanding the neighborhood dynamics and the programs that are out there. I also have some stuff scheduled in Highcrest out at Betty Phillips Park with Nikki Ramirez from Scent down the road too. So I wanted to highlight those community outreach pieces that we don't often talk about to the business community. I then wanted to go through some additional ones, some other miscellaneous community outreach programs. The Latino Leadership Academy, we had 2 officers participating in that program. We've had officers and commanders this year and in the initial year participate in the Mosaic Partner Pairs. And obviously, one of the things that I think I can't talk about enough is all the amazing work that our officers and commanders do on various charity board organizations throughout this entire community. It's not just something that we talk about. We are members of this community and we're on boards across the way. And I just wanted to list a few of them. The American Red Cross, Harvesters, PARS, Visit Topeka, Family Service and Guidance Center, Community Action, Boys and Girls Club, just to name a few of the organizations that members of the police department are on board of directors and or governing bodies for, just to show how layered our community outreach efforts actually are. And I think one of the things that we can't take for granted in the challenging world that we live in right now is we've successfully completed a whole bunch of community events in 2022 without incident, to include various parades and most recently the Fiesta Mexicana and Country Stampede in the same time frame, which was a challenge to say the least. But all of those things came together because of the community and because of the cooperation between the law enforcement and the entire public safety team. The Topeka Fire and the Topeka Police Department have probably never been closer as far as leadership goes. And the other day, we had the first ever that I'm aware of, at least in my 30 years, we put the fire department's command staff and the police department's command staff in the same room, and we all met each other and we talked through our shared experiences, and that I've already seen that grow into additional meetings and areas of collaboration that I don't know why we weren't doing for a long time between the fire department and the police department. So I give Chief Phillips a lot of credit for his leadership in that. Two little quick plugs that I wanted to do since we're talking about community events to put on everybody's calendar. National Night Out coming up on August 6th. Safe Streets, NIAs all over the city, the police department, and I know the fire department too will be at various locations all over the place, so don't forget about that. Plug that in on your calendar. And I am happy to report the TPD Citizens Academy, how you can learn about your police department, that is raved about by all of the people who have attended it in the past, begins on August 25th, and unfortunately it is completely full right now. It closed out very quickly when we opened it back up. But I wanted to put those 2 dates on everybody's calendar as well. And then I promise I'm wrapping up, but the last thing I wanted to cover was technology at the police department, because that is one of the goals. It's one of the program highlights, and I wanted to talk a little bit about, there's been some local media coverage on it, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it to the council and educate the public as well. The crime reduction that we're seeing is because of the focus of the police department and the community support that we have and the community outreach and the trust that has been built and is continuing to be built with the business community, the neighborhoods, the organizations, the service organizations, the youth groups, all of those things, and the embracing we have of technology. These are some of the things that allow us to continue to manage the vacancy crunch that we're under right now. So I wanted to highlight a little bit of the technology pieces that we have. We've had a big upgrade with a federal partnership with the ATF that has led to a NIBIN system, and I won't mess around with the acronyms too long because I know the acronyms confuse a lot of people who don't use them. But essentially, the short version of it is it's a ballistic evidence processing, shell casings processing system that's in-house at the police department that lets us turn results very quickly. There was some local coverage recently, if you saw it, about a homicide that was solved, and it led to a series of shootings that were solved based on this ballistic evidence comparison, quick turnaround ability that we have now at the police department because of the federal partnership. It is very specific to addressing gun violence in this city. It is working in this city. It will be I am going to go out on a limb and tell you, it will be a pilot program for how you address gun violence in other cities, because the ATF is very happy with the success that has happened on that. So I wanted to talk about that because we were able to embrace that technology. And I have to give credit where it was due here. This actually was a program that started under the interim city manager, Cochran, when he was the chief. But I've taken it to new heights.
Just saying.
So also last 2 things I wanted to say, we also have invested in electronic equipment, downloading capabilities, license plate readers, and security camera enhancements. Those have led to important evidence in all kinds of investigations, from property crimes to person crimes. And the last piece that I wanted to highlight, and I saved it intentionally for last, because I think it needs some more emphasis, as much emphasis as we could possibly give it. Domestic violence in this community, like every other community, is a community issue. It's not just a crime issue. It's a community issue. It doesn't get talked about enough, and we are always looking for new and inventive ways to address it. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the advanced lighting system that our crime scene officers have developed. And the essential simple version of it is it's a photography and lighting system that allows you to document for court evidence prosecution injuries that are trauma and injuries that are not visible to the eye but are underneath the skin level, so that you can say conclusively. Before, the only thing we had was a camera of, and this is very consistent with a choking incident or things of that nature, where there's not always visible injuries right away. This technology allows us to photograph and document injuries and trauma below the skin, which gives the evidence that we need, and we've in partnership with the Shawnee County District Attorney's Office to make this happen. But this is going to continue to be a developmental tool for us that we're just in the infancy stages on, but I'm excited about it because this gives us an opportunity to collect evidence that we haven't been able to collect before, which gives us a chance at more successful prosecutions. And there's a lot of recidivism in domestic violence crimes, and so being able to get prosecutions successfully on the higher end is a big deal. And so I made that my last point because I wanted to emphasize that. But that is some of my versions of performance-based budgeting. That is my version of what your police department brings to this community that goes beyond just crime statistics and clearances and arrests. This police department is part of this community, and that's the message that I wanted to end on. Any questions?
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a few questions for you, Chief. First of all, before I start, you have done a fantastic job, so thank you for everything that you've done. In
Appreciate that.
particular, really love the fact that you have the community police officers back at the NIAs. That was something they really, it's amazing the problems that can get solved by an officer being there, and they can go and talk to someone in the community, and it's not a legal action, it's maybe not even a police action, but they go and talk, and that's a great thing. You know, some people don't know that maybe you can't park a boat here, and so there's so many things that don't need to be a federal case. They can go out, so that's really helped. So I really appreciate that. My questions are, first of all, and excuse my ignorance, but what is the active bystandership for law enforcement? I have no idea what that is.
Okay, well, that's the peer intervention program. It was developed by Georgetown University for law enforcement agencies. And when I talk about a formalization of peer intervention, the policies have always outlined that there's a requirement for officers to intervene when they see another officer who is acting outside the scope of their authority or beyond the scope of the law. Georgetown University did complete a program to formalize that process and to train people law enforcement agencies specifically for the peer intervention tactics and techniques, as weird as it sounds, to be able to intervene successfully and to maneuver those situations. So that's the advanced training that we have in a very simplistic form. But I should have explained it better.
No, I get it. I thought when I hear bystander, I think like the public, like you're training people.
Active bystandership, like the other officers that are there on the scene. Is
Okay. My second question, and this may not be the police that does this, but maybe it's whoever puts the books together. But when you see this book, as you know, Topeka's gotten some bad press, mistakenly so, saying that we're like one of the top 3 cities for crime and stuff.
Yeah, we worked pretty hard to get the actual information out.
Yes,
there.
and I know you have. Thank you for that. But when you read this book, there's some things that fly off the page and they're not right, and that's why I guess maybe for next year we want to get it changed. On page 98, it says, if you just look at the performance measure, reading these without knowing what they mean, the homicide rate compared to national rate, national rate, or our rate's 93%. And I understand now from hearing you, that's the clearance rate
Right.
for homicide, but that's not the way this reads. Just so we're clear, it looks like we're like worse in every category. Like, we have a 93%
regrettably, I don't have
homicide
page
rate.
98,
Yeah.
but Adam's got what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
I guess I just request next year, can we please change that so it's the homicide clearance rate, because it looks like we have a 98% homicide rate, which would be.
I appreciate you bringing that forth because we worked very hard. I worked very hard personally at the police department to make the statistics accurate and get them out there because it's indicative of the great work that the troops do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to point that out because I looked at that just now and I'm like, hold on, this can't be right.
Right.
Then when you explained it, I caught it. Okay, last, a tougher question, and, I love the police and what you guys do, but I'm going to probably ask this to every department, but kind of following up on what Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala said, how do we know when something's right-sized? I mean, why is the police department the number of officers it is? I mean, why isn't it 400? Why isn't it 300? Why is it not 200? I mean, how do you determine, is this just based, well, this is what we've had? Can you tell, and if it's a long explanation, if you want to get back to me.
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, I would feel more comfortable having a better answer because I think that's a city formula. I'm aware of the 1 officer to 1,000. I think that Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala referred to. I've also seen 2 for 1,000. So I have a feeling it's a lot like I would want to go with a source that we can rely on and verify. So I would like the opportunity to do the research on that. I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you. I would also like that information. And I am compelled, because of knowing Officer Will Lister, to bring up the Salvation Army Boxing Club. He's your PAL person, and Officer Lister has done an exceptional job. He and the other coaches work anywhere with 45 over 60 children at least 2 nights a week. The majority of those children do not do additional sports. Some do, but the majority do not. So that is most likely the only way that they have that reach where they can get talked to, and the after-school program for mentoring, the after-school program if they're falling behind in school and keeping their grades up. And now Officer Lister and the coaches of the Salvation Army Boxing Club Three Shields are starting to go out across the state to boxing engagements and getting their young boxers out there. And so to see Officer Lister engage as he does with the children, with the youth, anywhere from 5 years old to some in their early and mid-20s, and his patience is very commendable. So I wanted to make sure to say that.
I appreciate that. I think there's lots of programs we can refer to that started here in Topeka. We probably don't talk about them enough that then become national programs. I'm aware of it. So hopefully this is one of those.
Chief, if I may.
Absolutely.
I wanted to back up on something that Councilman Emerson brought up, and that's the ABLE program. We've had presentations before on that, and I've been able to sit in on the training to see how it's received and how it's given to the officers. I had a question, though, and I thought I knew this answer. When the ABLE training is given to the line officers, do the command staff attend at the same time, or do they attend separately?
No, there are, we don't attend, there's not a single, just command staff one. Commanders are in different ones. In fact, I attended with a number of rank and file. So we are intermixed at all levels for those trainings.
And that's what I had hoped the answer would be, because I think it's important that they get the same message at the same time and have the clear understanding of what the ABLE program instills in their work on a daily basis. And there's no confusion as to, well, it's for the line officers but not for command staff. I'm glad to hear that that is a mixed class. So that was one thing I wanted to bring up. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit about is code. You talked about that, and I know that it is now under the police department. I would like to get your feel for how effective that alliance has been, especially since we've tried this new initiative on changing the culture. If it is an enhancement to that effort, is it working well? I know from my experience, code enforcement has bounced back and forth where it has, kind of been shuffled around. And I know that oftentimes there is a need to have code and police respond at the same time rather than separately. So could you give me a little feedback on how well that alliance or that collaboration is working?
Well, I like to use numbers to illustrate some things, and I can tell you this. As far as effectiveness, I think numbers sometimes let you kind of benchmark feelings. I could give you my impression as well too. But in 2022 so far, they increased the budget for $200,000 specifically as it related to demolitions, because that was such an issue that we had in the city. We've done 15, or property maintenance has done 15 demolitions so far in 2022, with 9 more that have been awarded. And so I think that's a good sign of trending in the right direction, at least in that one benchmark. As far as saying, I think there's some advantages to code compliance, as you spoke about, being in the police department's framework. And I think there's also some other places where it's been effective as well. So I think the jury's still out, as I wouldn't want to go too far on a culture change right now. It's pretty early in a culture change to make a statement about it one way or the other. But I think that we are trending in the right direction. I think there's a lot of positivity things going on in Topeka, and I think that this culture change at code is one of those things. It's kind of early to say, but my impression is that we're moving in the right direction. We just have to continue to monitor it. But I think there are times, as you alluded to, when having code under the police department is an advantage. I sometimes wonder too, I know in the past it's been under community engagement and things too. And so there's probably my perspective is only from the police chief, police department perspective. So I would want to hear from somebody who was there and saw how the community engagement piece worked too. But I think it's a good piece for us as we stand today.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm familiar with the program they used to call alert centers. It was in Arkansas, and they did the very same thing. In that case, they had precincts, small precincts like we used to have with community policing, and they staffed them with both code compliance and police officers, and they worked in tandem to resolve complaints. And sometimes it's difficult for people to see the tie between code infractions and crime in a neighborhood. So I think that's good that it's moving along so far as well as we can, and we would encourage that acceptance that's part of the police work as well, just like everything else.
Yeah, I'm definitely a believer in the old theory of the broken window theory about unattended things allowing to be declined, kind of lets you know or makes the impression that people don't care in a neighborhood. So I believe that, and I believe that quality of life issues, as Councilman Emerson was talking about too, boats and trailers and different things parked, those are all opportunities for the police department and for property maintenance to build trust and service to our community. So I look at those a little differently now than maybe I did early on in my career.
I understand. And I'm glad you brought up the technology piece for the department. I'm familiar with the new camera you were talking about.
ALS, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that and what it can do, and it's very impressive. As you explained, at the scene of a domestic violence incident, you may not see surface injuries that would lead to the truthfulness of the event, but you take a picture with that camera and you can see it under the skin and in the muscle, and it's obvious that trauma has occurred, and that technology is really advanced. I'm impressed that the police department here has it, because that's something you might look at a larger agency, but I'm really pleased that we have it, and would encourage that we continue however we can in collecting significant data on what we do and continuing our growth in technology. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it was very helpful for us to understand the depth and breadth of the involvement that the department has with the community beyond car stops and the like. So thank you very much, Chief.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the Chief? Councilwoman Hiller.
I wanted to throw in a comment about the mental health questions just for a moment, if that's okay. I just want to remind everybody, for one, we've all got the police and community report on ways that things could be improved in the department, but also recognizing things that were going well. Most of those things didn't cost any money, but they are outcomes based that people could look at as we go through this process. In the discussion about mental health, though, my recollection, and certainly what we came up with on the Police and Community Special Committee, was that when we heard from the public, when we heard from the mental health professionals, as well as when we heard from the police officers and the department themselves, is that really that policing and mental health, specifically trained mental health services, are an and situation. It's not one or the other, that even, certainly the mental health training is fundamental to everything that the police department does. It's for de-escalation, it's for command of a situation, understanding different personalities, and so on. But what we learned is that when there's a crisis, you're never quite sure how it's going to go, and that everyone looks to having the police department there to take command of the situation and to be able to manage that situation. That the mental health professionals are critical as well. So it's a partnership, which is what we've done well in the past. And when we looked at the report out of Police and Community, I'm not going to be able to quote it, but it said we want to increase that training and we want to look at making that teamwork more robust. But that's a partnership as well. And for instance, I think we heard from interim city manager this week that the 2 vacant positions on the CI team are in the process of being filled.
everybody's been having trouble hiring, so that's out there and available. And what's happening on the mental health side is two major developments are happening funding-wise on their side, a change in the way that agencies can bill in terms of getting more dollars into those mental health centers for them to hire on their side of the partnership people who are specifically mental health trained, as well as some grant money that's coming down. And so as we all look at the budget, it's what's our part of it, well, what's somebody else's part of it, if it needs to be a partnership, and how are we doing on both of those. And just wanted to lay out that at least the conclusion I got with all the levels, the public on the street, everybody wanted the police in those situations. They believe in police, but they wanted the mental health assistance where needed as well, and that it was an and situation. So,
Councilwoman Viviacla.
Thank you. So, taking into account that those meetings didn't have open public comment at the meetings, the majority of them, I don't think that you can say as a blanket statement that all the community or all the social workers, it was a part of community. Just like when I'm talking about, as far as those that are seeking some type of separation or third partying out and lessen that stress, is that this is often coming from different social workers than you've been talking to, and it's also coming from marginalized communities who have had the interaction that has not always been the most positive with law enforcement and mental health. And I think that the blanket statement, unfortunately, that you're trying to make, I would take no to, because that's not, you didn't talk to everybody at that community, at that police committee. So public, realize that too.
if I may.
Councilwoman.
I was making reference to the roughly 100 hours that I spent and that most of us did prior to that committee even convening, in terms of spending time on the street and public input at the council meetings.
You're not the only one that does it.
No, I'm
Okay,
not.
let's be clear.
Not at all.
Councilman Kell.
I just wanted to say that the ABLE program is, from what I've seen, just watching, we're in the digital age of, videos on every officer, it seems like. And I watch a lot of those videos just because I think they're good learning aspects of how things go on. And I've actually seen the ABLE kind of things going on lately and how well it works. Like it says right here, prevent misconduct, avoid mistakes, promote health and wellness, is when they can work together on a situation rather than, oh, you're the first scene, you're in charge, or the ranking officer shows up, now they're in charge. It works really well because there are situations where they sometimes get a little out of hand. And just recently in Florida, there was a situation like that. And a young officer stepped in on that situation. And it's nice to actually see that out there now, where it's not just, here I am, I'm taking charge of this and that's it. It's the officers work together, it seems like, with the ABLE program.
Further questions for the chief? Thank you, Chief. Mr. Wade?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just real quick, I know that Taylor's trying to watch Zoom pretty closely. It's hard to see the council members on Zoom. You might just recommend they holler at us if they
Yeah.
have something.
Councilwoman Nager, did you have a question for the chief or deputy mayor?
Nope, I'll just say something if I have something.
Okay. And is Councilman Lesser on Zoom as well?
Lesser, Dobler, and Ortiz are all on Zoom.
Okay.
Oh.
It's hard to see them all in here.
As far as you know.
Oh, there you go. There he goes.
Welcome us down.
Woke the bear. Okay, thank you. Mr. Wade, as I was looking at the schedule, is now this the opportunity for Chief, the fire chief to come up and give his presentation in the section here?
Yes, if Chief Phillips and
Chief
Deputy
Phillips.
Chief Standifer could come up.
While they come up, I'll go over once again the financials for the fire department. So if you will turn to pages 92 to 95 of your budget. Right now in particular, I'm looking at page 92. So overall, the fire department's budget is $32.5 million. This is an increase of about 7.7% from 2022. Of the 32.5 million, about 89% is tied up in personnel costs. Personnel increased about 1.9 million from 2022. This is an average increase in union salaries of about 4% and 10% in non-union employees. Commodities increased by about 8.1% or $55,000. This is primarily driven by an increase in protective equipment. And like the police department, we expect fuel prices to be higher than what they have been. So that is something that we continue to look at. And so we expect to increase the fuel amount in the fire department as well, a little bit there. Contractual expenses have increased by about 15%, and similar to the police department again, those costs are mostly driven by internal service fees in the IT and fleet departments. The FTE positions increased from 246 in 22 to 247 this year. The added position is a training officer, which would restore a previous training officer position to assist with increased focus on training and professional development of members. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor, governing body. I want to start by thanking Finance Director Steve Wade and his staff who've helped us work through this budget process with the amount of new staff and turnover we've had at the fire department. I want to take an opportunity to thank our business service manager, Mike Benson, who's unable to attend this evening, but who has worked diligently with administrative staff to prepare the proposed fire budget for 2023. And I'd also like to thank my administrative staff, Deputy Chief Tony Standifer, who's here with me tonight, as well as the new division chiefs, Jason Broadbent, Chuck Gatewood, Bruce Andrus, and Fire Marshal Alan Stahl, who have all worked on pretty short notice to help us put these budget numbers together. This has been a learning process for all of us, but we feel we've made progress in identifying areas of improvement and areas of need, which we plan to address as we move forward. We currently are still very much in an evaluation period as a staff and believe we will continue to identify opportunities to improve our performance and service delivery. Back to the first slide there, the increased FTE, the training officer position. Throughout most of my career, we've had 4 training officers within the fire department. That decreased down to 3 over the last few years due to some other issues. We're asking to restore that position. We currently do have 3 training officer positions. We try to conduct 2 recruit academies throughout the course of a year. Those are each 12 weeks in length. So that takes 2 of our training officers minimum to conduct those academies. So that right there takes away 2 of our training officers for half the year, just with new recruit training, as well as time for them to prepare and put lesson plans, things of that nature together, as well as evaluating those recruits. It eats up a lot of their time throughout the course of a year. That does not include any of the recertification and continuing ed hours that our current department staff needs to be able to receive and get done, completed throughout the year. So that's the reason for the ask there. The 2 biggest expense increases as far as change from 22 to 23, protective gear. That is to cover the increased amount with planning for 20 new hires. If we can get enough potential new hires through the recruitment process, we are capable of doing 2 academies at 10 recruits a year. That's 20 new recruits, as well as annual replacement of outdated and damaged gear. Just like with everything else, with the increased expenses for those types of equipment, we're just seeing a need for more funds there. Outside training, one of the primary focuses of myself and the new staff is professional development of the department all the way through the ranks. A big piece of that is allowing for outside training opportunities and outside seminars for our people to be able to attend, which we have not done a good job of in the past and we're trying to improve on. But that's the reason for the increase in that line item. Just briefly, currently, I know it was talked about during PD's presentation with vacancies. We currently have 13 vacancies. We have 3 department members that have to retire by the end of December. And we have 3 more personnel who have expressed, at this point, a tentative interest in retiring by the end of the year. So we're planning on at least 6 additional retirements by the end of the year. We have a recruit class that starts September 19th. Hopefully that will be a full class of 10. So we're planning on being somewhere right around that 10 to 12 vacancy mark at the beginning of next year. If we can move on to the next slide.
Or not.
Okay, programming highlights. We'll kind of try to follow along with this. Administrative efficiency. Since myself and staff have come in, we combined the EMS and training divisions under one division chief position and created a division chief of administration position to allow for better distribution of responsibilities and increased focus on professional development of members. Not only does the division chief of administration have a focus on professional development, that individual is also working on a number of tracking programs for equipment and apparatus. As we move forward, once again, it's not something that we've done well previously, and it has caused us to end up in some situations where we're kind of playing catch up or having to come back and ask for additional funds when we hit items that we weren't planning for. Ems Delivery, we added, with the settlement of the contract last year, we added advanced EMTs to our ALS staffing this year, which allowed for an additional company to be staffed to provide ALS response, which moved us from 3 to 4 of our 18 frontline companies. We are in the process of putting together an advanced EMT class, which we will conduct in-house, which will complete roughly in the spring of next year. The goal is to have 10 to 12 additional personnel certified at the advanced emergency medical technician level, which would allow us to add 2 to 3 more units across the city to provide ALS response. With inspections and prevention, we inspected all apartment complexes with more than 11 units for the first time this year. That is something that's new for us. We have an MOU with the state, which kind of outlines the certain occupancies that we have to inspect every year. And we're trying to branch out and move our inspection efforts beyond that. It's also, the goal is to move into more mercantile occupancies as we move forward. Additionally, we have started the code adoption process to move from the 2013 to the 2021 life safety fire codes. Our inspection and prevention department has been working with other city departments as well as community members to complete that task, which is no small task if anybody has been involved with that at all. Another highlight this year, since we've taken over, we worked jointly with the finance department to obtain funding and complete the purchase of new extrication equipment for all 6 truck companies. It's a newer level of equipment. It's all battery operated rather than the old power plant hydraulic systems. Some of those were 20 years old or more. We had a need for a replacement. We were able to work with Director Wade and his department to come up with the funding. And I will say that by working together and being able to do that all at once, we saved approximately $40,000 to $50,000 on the purchase price, rather than if we had piecemealed it and purchased 1 or 2 sets at a time. By doing an order of that size, we were able to obtain preferred pricing, which saved us additional funds. We also completed training and implementation of new grant-funded thermal imaging cameras for all of our apparatus. Through an AFG grant, we received 46 new thermal imaging cameras. We completed initial training with those, and those are out on our apparatus as we speak. We are currently creating an officer development program for lieutenants and captains and a new training matrix for tracking progress and performance of new recruits. The officer development program for lieutenants and captains is modeled after a program in El Paso, Texas. What we did was we sent out an anonymous survey to all department members, and based on feedback, selected a cadre of instructors from within the department ranks. Some are chief officers, some are currently company officers at the captain level, that will be putting this program together and then delivering it to new lieutenants and officers on up the ranks as we move forward. So it's our own training our own. And the instructors were selected based on their reputations and their experience and their knowledge by the current department members, which we're really proud of. We currently have graduated 13 new recruits this year from 2 separate 12-week training academies. We kind of had a little overlap. Last year's fall class didn't get started till late, so they actually graduated in January. We recently had another class that graduated in June. And then, like I said a few minutes ago, we have a class that starts September 19th with hopefully an anticipated graduation date in December. We currently also, as Chief Wheelis mentioned earlier, we just completed the Country Stampede in Fiesta, working through those events with PD as well as other community partners. And then we have also just recently had 2 battalion chiefs and a senior captain who completed a week-long training command course at the National Fire Academy. And we have 2 more battalion chiefs slated for attending National Fire Academy class next month in August in Arkansas. So performance and goals. So the officer development program that we're currently putting in place, that will be implemented as we move into next year. And it is our goal to have National Fire Academy attendance for 12 to 15 personnel next year. One thing to understand about the National Fire Academy, that is a program through the U.S. Fire Administration where the only expense we have as a department here, as a city, is their meal ticket. All other expenses for travel, the course attendance, and their lodging is paid for. And then sometimes, depending on staffing levels, we do have to absorb the cost of backfilling of those positions while those personnel are back in Maryland attending those classes. Continuation of our Blue Card Incident Command Program with certification of additional 25 to 30 personnel. That is a incident command certification system that was implemented in the department roughly 6 or 7 years ago. And we just continue to work on moving through the ranks to have additional personnel certified in that. And the goal is to eventually that we'll get to the point where we'll meet in the middle where our senior personnel, as they obtain that training, and our junior personnel moving up, those junior personnel are going to be where that's the only system they've known for their entire career. And so they're going to move seamlessly into those upper levels with that program. We also, like I said earlier, will complete the in-house advanced EMT class, which will allow for continued expansion of ALS delivery across the city. Another performance goal we have for next year is to re-engage with community partners to build a paramedicine program. That was something that had been being worked on previously with Stormontville and other community partners, and right as that was really starting to ramp up, COVID hit, and due to concerns with that program kind of got put on hold. So we're hoping to kind of ramp up those efforts again and get that back out in the community. A continued use of technology to reduce our shoot times, thereby reducing our overall response times for emergency responses. That is a national standard, performance standard. I know Chief Wheelis talked about like clearance rates for crime statistics, response times, and at different intervals are all tracked and are used as national standards by NFPA. There's a dispatch component to that. There is what they call the shoot time, or that's the time from when we receive the call to when we're in our apparatus rolling out the door. And then you have the actual drive time component that makes up that overall response time. So we're looking at some ways that we can streamline that and get out the door quicker, which should reduce our overall response times. I also would like to say that we've had some very good conversations with this, along with the dispatch center. They have a new director up there, and he's been a very good partner right off the bat to work with on that. Increase our number of inspections conducted in mercantile occupancies, as well as implement a food truck inspection program. That is something that's been being worked on by our prevention division, and they've even had some initial conversations on some efforts to actually come up with a standardized food truck inspection program from the Kansas City area all the way through to Topeka. A lot of these vendors travel from city to city, and this would allow for them to, maybe whether they get inspected in Topeka or Lawrence or the Kansas City area, to obtain one certification or one inspection certificate and be able to operate on a standardized set of rules throughout those different communities. Also, we have looking to implement internal advanced cardiac life support instructors for delivery of ACLS recertification training for our paramedics and advanced EMTs, as well as development of an apparatus operator task book, which that would be for new apparatus operators. It would be a task book that they would have to complete upon their promotion, just to as like a skills check to make sure that they're moving into that role successfully. A few other highlights I'd like to mention. We have also begun preliminary discussions as a staff on the process to develop a standard of cover and strategic plan for the department. That's something that's probably been long overdue, and once that process is through and in place, that would answer a number of questions and kind of point us in the direction on future goals, and also be in line with the outcome-based budgeting process as we move forward. I do want to mention, just as Chief Wheelis did, that him and I have had some very good conversations, have a very good working relationship, and have really been looking at ways that we can work together for a joint public safety focus for the community. We did hold a joint staff meeting, which I know a few of you were able to attend. Very encouraged by that, looking to continue those efforts. And we even currently have our newest fire investigators currently in the PD Academy, which just started, for him to obtain his full Kansas law enforcement certification. So another cooperative effort there. Community engagement. Myself and other staff have been out to a number of NIAs recently. Plan to continue that. We also completed our third year of Camp Courage, which is where we bring, it's run by female firefighters within our department, and we get volunteer instructors from other departments in the area. We have ages 14 to 20 are the participants. We're full every year, and we're actually working to put together a condensed version of that for females who would be of age to be hired as firefighters by the department for this fall. We've had interest expressed by people who wanted to apply that were outside of the age range, and plus we look at it as another recruiting effort that we can utilize to try and increase our numbers with that demographic. I know it was mentioned earlier about the Three Shields Boxing. We have a department member who I believe this week has started attending over there as a volunteer coach. So we'll be involved with that. And I also would like to say that I'm very proud of myself and my staff's efforts in working more cooperatively with other city departments. not just with the police department, but with legal, HR, finance, and even the water department. We've had opportunities to work together to make improvements in a number of areas, and very proud of that. We are not an island. We're all in this together as partners, and we plan on continuing those efforts as we move into 2023 and beyond. One other thing I'd like to highlight is that our arson canine, that program is one that we've had in place for a number of years. But what a lot of people may not know is that the canine is actually financed and paid for by the ATF. As part of that agreement, our canine handler has to be available for call-outs as part of an ATF task force. And recently, Investigator Valentine and our arson canine Benny have been called out multiple times, including just within the last couple of days to the double fatality fire in Kansas City, Missouri. I think that is a great compliment to Investigator Valentine and to the department as a whole. The level of professionalism and expertise that him and his canine partner have shown, and the respect that they've earned, that they're called out in numerous other areas where there may even be a dog team that's closer, but they have been called in because of their expertise. And then I would also say that mental health, I know was talked about a lot under PD's presentation. There were some questions about that. I've reached out to Chief Wheelis, and we actually have set up a meeting, myself and him, with a representative from Vallejo to see if there's the possibility of an increased role for the fire department and our responders in those efforts. There are a number of times throughout the year where our personnel are going out on medical calls, and when they get there, they're realizing that actually what we're dealing with is a mental health situation. That's a lot of times where we're calling and asking if there's a CIT officer available, and we want to make sure that we can make that as seamless as possible, and if there's an increased or additional role for us to play in that situation, we want to be able to provide that service as well. And I'll use we recently had an incident where one of our crews was returning from a call. They were getting flagged down on a bridge, on an overpass. They pulled up. Turns out there was a lady who was preparing to jump from the bridge, and our crew actually was able to grab a hold of her and pull her back. So it's not something that is just the focus or the responsibility of any one department, but once again, I think there's room for cooperative efforts to improve the mental health response of our public safety departments as a whole. And with that, if you have any questions.
Councilman McHale?
So on the 3 that you have mandatory retirement by the first of the year, I just know that there was a couple that were talking about possibly fighting that when I went to go visit a lot of the fire departments after I got elected. Are there any lawsuits or anything out there hanging out right now with those individuals that might like maybe impede a new hire situation?
Not that I'm aware of, but I would say if there was, that would probably.
Mayor, did you?
I was going to say, Councilman Carroll, I think that's out of the scope of our discussion on budgets.
Okay. And then on other things, is there a list of repairs needed to be done to the firehouses? Because just my tour of the firehouses, I noticed that there was a lot of things, and I look at it as this is where these men and women live half their working life when they're with the department, and we need to try to make sure these are very up to where they need to be, and that's one of the things that, budget-wise, I want to make sure we're fixing these firehouses to make sure these men and women have a safe place to live because they're dealing with enough outside of the firehouses with the smoke and all the other chemicals they breathe in, that they need to have a safe, dry, good air quality firehouse.
Mayor?
Yeah, City Manager?
Yeah, Councilman and governing body, If you remember, I send out about monthly updates on all the renovations that are taking place to the firehouses. We're investing about $5 million currently on the firehouses that we have. And I know that when Public Works gives their presentation, that they'll be covering some of those things in that.
All right, thank you.
And I remember an update on the progress at some of those specific locations that have been shared with the governing body. So they are moving in the right direction and doing the work that's necessary for the
Because
firefighters.
I knew one was an air conditioner was blowing hot during some of the hottest days. So it's one of those things of, I just want to make sure we almost have like emergency money there so we can fix those. Because like I said, those are places people are living at and they can't telework and they can't do other things sometimes to have a livable situation.
Further questions for the chief? Or Chief, you have a response?
I was just going to say is that we've gotten great cooperation from facilities as we navigate our way through a number of these projects. We've had a number of different projects going on at a number of different stations at the same time. And between our staff and facility staff, we've been working very well together to make sure that those are progressing and moving along to make sure our facilities are where they need to be.
Further questions for the chief? I have a couple, but I want to make sure I give everybody a chance. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple questions. First of all, a few weeks ago, AMR, I don't know if you guys were here or not, I was remote that night, but AMR gave a presentation about a new dispatching system where they send a different type of unit if it's if it's somebody fell down and just needs help up or something versus a guy's having a heart attack or something. Are you guys involved with that as well?
So I believe what you're referring to is nurse navigation, which actually is that's not what type of vehicle or what type of unit, whether it's basic life support or advanced life support, actually goes to that call. That is how it's handled in dispatch. But that is whether or not it is routed to a normal 911 dispatcher for a potential ambulance and or fire truck to go out and take care of that situation versus on some lower acuity type calls. Those would go over to a call center where it's staffed by a nurse, and they would do a triage, much as what's done in the emergency room when you go in there. So, and those may be instances where it's not appropriate for either a first responder unit from the fire department or an ambulance from AMR to respond. But that program is not currently in place yet, but that is something that they are moving towards in the future.
And thank you for that. And once it does, you guys will do the same. I mean, you also won't roll a ladder truck if a person, you'll do the same thing.
Yeah, we're not going to go unless the dispatch center classifies that as a call, a level call that we need to respond to, and then they're going to send us.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, thank you for that. Second question, kind of similar to what I asked the police chief, so you know what's coming. But, what determines, I guess, the size of the department we need? I mean, honestly, it feels like it's just been, well, this is how many we have. And this year, I'll pick on you a little bit here. You want to add a training officer. Well, you look at the amount of training hours that you've had in the last 3 years, it looks like if you've had 3, there's close to 60,000 hours. And next year, you add a fourth, but next year it's about, your goal is 60,000 and 60,000. So right now, each of them is do about 20,000 on average, right, per training officer. So what would the additional do for you?
So there's really kind of 2 components to our yearly training requirements for our personnel that are already in place. There is a piece that a number of hours, and pardon me, I don't have the exact number, it's roughly around 190 hours a year that each department member needs to complete to help with our ISO level rating. That's one of the components that is looked at when they score us, when they come in every 5 years and score us. Additionally, we have an EMS training piece where whether they are an EMT, an advanced EMT, or a paramedic, the State Board of EMS sets a certain number of continuing education hours that they have to complete every year to maintain their certification. A lot of that currently has to be done online because of not having the staff to do more hands-on evolutions with our training. we're always looking for ways to try and have more hands-on evolutions with our training, whether that's live fire training, whether that's extrication training, whether that's even scenario-based EMS training. The fewer the number of the training officers, the less that we can do that. So that is an area where we're trying to improve as well.
And just to clarify, so hands-on training would be like, one is you're looking, the way they're doing it right now for some of that is they're looking at a computer screen and doing some online versus you're actually doing something physically, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And back to your original question about size of the department. We operate 12 stations with 18 frontline companies. That has been our response model for at least 30 years.
Right.
Our call volume has continued to increase over those years. The types of services have expanded from what we offered to the community 30 years ago. But there's also some national standards that are based on how you want to construct your fire department. Like I said, there's the response time piece, which that's going to be, a piece of that is going to be how many stations you have, how many apparatus you have, where they're located within your city, the types of apparatus you have, and then we have minimum staffing requirements. We have a 3-person mandatory staffing requirement, minimum staffing requirement within the contract for safety reasons. There are national standards through NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, which actually sets that standard at a higher number, which would be a minimum of 4 per apparatus at all times, whereas probably 95% of the time or more, our apparatus are operating with only 3. So there are some national standards out there that you want to try and, as benchmarks, you want to try and hit. Do most communities meet some of those standards? Not always, but you're always striving to try and get there.
Thank you.
Further questions for the chief?
Mr. Mayor,
Who is that?
this
I
is,
can't even see. Secret Sylvia. Councilwoman Ortiz. Can't see.
yeah, you don't want to see me right now. I have a question for the chief, please. Chief, where are we at on the rotation of our trucks? Are we in good shape or,
So, as we talked about during the CIP process, we currently have 2 engine companies that are being built as we speak. We have a truck company on order, which has not started the build process yet, will later this year. And then we are budgeted to replace an aerial apparatus in '23. And then moving forward into '24 and '25, during the CIP process, the council approved some additional monies over what had originally been budgeted, which should hopefully allow us to purchase 3 apparatus in each of those years and should get us, it actually should reduce the time that we get back on the rotation schedule where we would like to be, that is our goal, from 2031 to 2027. So while we're not exactly where we want to be, I am confident with the state of our fleet and that we are moving in the right direction with that replacement program.
okay, because that's always been a big concern for me. Question number 2, excuse me. In their bathrooms, they had those automatic faucets. Did those ever get changed back out for the guys?
Yes, those have been replaced back to where they can set the temperature and themselves for some of their hygiene needs.
I appreciate that. It's kind of hard to shave when you have on and off water there,
Yes, it is.
And I want to personally thank you for coming out to the NIAs to answer their needs and to also update them on illegal burns. I think I'll send my pamphlet to my colleagues so that they can invite the fire chief and his team to come out, because you would be surprised what is on there. And again, I just can't say it enough. The education piece, the education piece, the education piece for our community members to make Topeka safe. So again, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr.
Councilwoman Vadiviakala.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, on the nurse navigation, I know you said that it's not being implemented yet. I remember initial discussions about it back when the Fire Commission had been meeting, and thought that it was a wonderful idea because how it could lessen, trucks having to go out. It could lessen emergency rooms, getting visits that may not be needed. And I know that you said that it's coming, but is there any indication on, is it just a pilot program right now? And when do you anticipate that it may be coming to the fire department?
Once again, that is a dispatch program with AMR. That is not something that we control as the fire department. So I really cannot give you a for sure answer on
So
that.
when they're ready, they'll tell you, if they're ready for you,
Yeah.
to execute it with you all to see how it will run.
Yes, and please understand, once again, that it's more of a dispatch program than it is a response program. It affects how we respond and what calls we will or won't respond to as we move forward. But the program itself is contained within the dispatch center. And what it will do is as they move through their priority dispatching prompts, it will integrate with that to where if it meets certain levels for a lower acuity call, then it will bump over to the nurse navigation system. But with any new program, I think it's fair to say, there are concerns to be worked through, bugs to be worked out, and when you're talking about people calling in and having a need through the 911 system, you want to make sure that those calls are being handled appropriately at the appropriate level.
Right, and I know that when there was the initial discussion on the Fire Commission, there was quite a bit of dialogue about it and excitement at the possibilities of what it could mean overall, not just only to the fire department, but, again, just lessening burden in areas if it wasn't needed, so.
I think the most important thing is that we want to be able to have the right resources available to respond to requests for service in an appropriate amount of time. That's always the number one goal. So when we can more accurately dispatch the calls with the right types of resources, then yes, that can help facilitate that.
All right, thank you.
Further questions for the chief? Chief, I want to ask you a couple things and also speak to a couple items that you brought up. One of them is your Camp Courage. I want to compliment you on that. I was appreciative of the opportunity to attend and see the interaction between all of the instructors locally and from visiting agencies, and the real intense attention that the students were giving to all the information they were receiving. I think it's important that you continue that, and that goes to my further comment that, and you and I have talked a little bit about recruitment efforts with the fire department. I'm not comparing apples and oranges. I know the police department is very supportive of its recruiting staff and works hard to try and get them out in the venues that hopefully will bring new applicants to. I would hope that it can be a more robust effort from the fire department. I'd like to see some real, demographic change, because I think it's important that people see the fire service as a real opportunity for everyone. And I think you have a great fire department, and the more people that can participate in it, the better. So if there's anything I can do or offer in the way of help or suggestions to meet that recruitment population, just let me know, because I think it's important that you do that. And I compliment you for your efforts there.
Thank you. And I just would like to take a quick moment. I want to give credit where credit is due. And the real driving force behind that program, and has been since the inception of it, is Captain Rachel Hawkinson Penny, who is a member of our staff who has taken that and run with it. And she gives tirelessly of her time and effort to make that program what it is. I will tell you that on the recruiting efforts, we are working to increase those to reach different demographics. I've had some conversations with the city manager on some areas that we may look at to try and improve and expand our applicant pool as we move forward, as well as we've had some discussions with Human Resources and the Civil Service Commission as well about some areas that we can look at to help those inclusion efforts as we move forward.
Thank you. Also, I wanted to comment, I liked what you were saying about a very intentional program to develop your staff professionally and to get them to that level that you believe they are capable of and that we need in the department to provide up-to-date essential services for the citizens. I encourage you to continue that program and share that information with us when you have people going up different levels or getting a certification or something that increases that level of professionalism. I think it does nothing but speak well about you as a leader and of our department. So I encourage you to continue to do that. I appreciate the information that you shared with us on that. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. And I will say is that, you know, coming from within the department and being promoted into the position that I'm in, I take as a great honor, but also a great responsibility. And I feel, and I know my staff agrees with me 100% on this, is that we have part of our responsibility in the positions that we're in now is to develop the next generation of leaders for the fire department, and on and on and on. We have an extremely talented group of individuals that serve this committee or this community as members of the fire department, and we have to provide the opportunities for them to prepare themselves to move into those upper level positions.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the Chief? Anybody online? Okay. Thank you again for your presentation. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
Tony?
Mayor,
Yes.
we were scheduled for a break at 7:40. I didn't know if you wanted to do that or drive through.
We can take that break. Be back, what, at 5 till? So we can keep moving on? Okay? We're back in session again on our budget workshop, and next we will have Public Works presentation.
Yeah,
Mr.
so
Copley, or Adam, go ahead.
we'll do
sorry.
another financial overview for Public Works. So total budget for Public Works, $47.2 million. And this spans across 6 different funds that you'll see on the slide. You'll notice in the budget book that this year's budget is about $8.7 million less than 2022. This is primarily due to a difference in budgeting for the fund balance in the half-cent sales tax fund. So last year it was budgeted for about $17 million of fund balance, and this year's only $5 million. And so that's where that large difference comes from. The debt line item that in the budget book for 2023, you'll see is currently 0. We will be adding $890,000 to that line item. It was a coding error, and so the budget will go up that amount. And that is for debt service payments for capital improvements that have already been completed in the parking fund. So continued debt service payments. There's a large increase in commodities and contractual that the Public Works team will discuss in more detail in their presentations. Capital outlay, you'll also notice, is down in the budget book, and this is on page 114 of the budget book. This is because of parking, and so there's been a lot of talk about the parking budget recently. And so just For clarification of what is in the budget this year for parking, currently, no funds have been budgeted for capital improvements, and there's been no adjustment in rates, additional debt obligations, or changes in ownership of any of the garages. There is 158 budgeted FTEs, which is one lower than 2022, and that is the removal of an analyst in the parking department. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Copley.
Thank you for the opportunity to present the Public Works and Utilities budgets. As the starting point, our challenges are twofold. And I'd like to say that we're challenging our employees to do more with less. We have substantially less employees. We have high level of vacancies. And we also have incredibly high inflation in terms of the cost of materials. And we will cover both of those. On the vacancy side, the fleet division is operating with 30% vacancies. Facilities division is operating at 50% vacancies. The street department, we're at 40% vacancies right now. And engineering is 40% vacancies across the board. That's 4 vacant engineer positions and a number of engineer tech positions. So I mentioned the increase in costs. Overall, we're looking at a, did I jump 2? Sorry about that. We gotta let you do this and all. So on the staffing challenges that we're facing, again, it's not an acceptable excuse to me for people to say we don't have enough staff. What I want to hear is what we're doing to get the work done, right? Because if I can't do it, doesn't cut it with me, and it most certainly doesn't cut it with the city manager. So on the engineering side, what we're doing to get things done is that we have entered into contracts with outside consultants, and we have them managing projects now, because when you have 3 engineers and you have 100 projects, that just math doesn't pencil out. So we're engaging outside consultants to help make us more efficient. On the fleet side, we are exploring the possibility of outsourcing the management of the parts portion of fleet. That will allow our fleet mechanics to focus on fixing things as opposed to chasing down parts. And then it's been mentioned before, but with the shortage of staff in street, we have to figure out how we're going to execute our snow plan come this winter. And to do that, we're looking at two ways to supplement. One is by having WPC staff take over the snow removal in Oakland. And then we're also talking to our contractor about expanding the work that they do. They have been, the last couple of years, responsible for the core business district. We're talking with them about expanding and picking up additional zones immediately adjacent that would still be efficient. So those are, in terms of what we're doing to overcome some staffing challenges. So cost increases. The overall almost 25% increase in commodities. Most of that is attributable to asphalt and concrete. For the street department is up 40%, and I'm sure that Councilmember Emerson will basically echo that sentiment in terms of what we're seeing across the board in terms of those costs. Additionally, we have a 6% increase across the board in the utilities, and those are the franchise utilities as well as the city utilities. So it's not enough for me to rest on our laurels and say, let's figure out what to do, how to do more with less. It's also, how do we improve our service level? Okay, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is we still have to provide a service to these citizens and to our ratepayers. And so one of those things that we have done is we've talked about with the Public Infrastructure Committee is we've taken a hard look at that 50/50 program. And in the past, it had always been homeowner pays 50%, city picks up the other 50% for sidewalks for residential properties. And so what we've done now is we've expanded that so that qualifying LMI individuals, the city will pick up their 50% share as well. And then we have also expanded the technology use that we have in the street department and the traffic signals division, and that is to have remote ability to reset and program our traffic signals without having to actually have a tech be on site and get into a signal. And so this is basically the traffic signal version of the utilities SCADA system. So it allows for the remote operation of signals. Additional service level improvements. 2021, we had 14 major street projects. Almost 51,000 lineal feet of curb and gutter replacement between 2021 and 2022. And I will give all the credit where it's due, and that's to Vince Sheets, who has stepped in and has done a fantastic job where we had a significant backlog. Vince has stepped in terms of getting curb and gutter projects out on the street. And for the most part, we don't engineer these. It's basically Vince working with the contractor to figure out how to get it done and get that sidewalk down. Now, there are some cases, like the Whitson School, where we have to engineer that because we have significant challenges on that in terms of grade, and then also some ADA issues that we have to address. There was a question from Councilmember Kell about the fire station improvements. Just to summarize, in terms of HVAC, lighting, alarm, vehicle exhaust systems, and then the one that is most near and dear to my heart is the utilities guy, and that is those grit oil separators to protect our sanitary sewer system. So you can take the guy out of the utilities, but you can't take the utilities out of the guy. All right, and then I will point out that we are starting to make good progress back to pre-COVID levels. We're at basically 90.3% in terms of our occupancy in our parking garages downtown. Street sweeping efficiency, I have to give tremendous credit to Tony and Todd, who have taken a hard look at this, and they have completely revamped this project, or the way this program works. So it used to be that twice a year, all 25 districts got swept. And one of our staff members basically said, why am I out here burning brushes and burning fuel? Because the streets are perfectly clean. And then you had other areas where you couldn't even get 1 mile an hour of progress because there were so many leaves in the street that they would basically get half a block and have to stop and dump their load, right? So basically it's talking about right sizing it, which is, like areas like Potwin and Oakland, we're hitting those 4 and 5 times because we need to keep those streets clean. There are outlying areas that we can send a vac truck out once during the year and does a perfectly good job, and we still have that high level of service. So my hats off to them. They have done a fantastic job, and that's been reflected in terms of the number of street sweeping C-Click fix tickets that we get had dropped dramatically once this program got into place. Then I want to talk about, and I want to brag on Tony and Todd again, which is this past year they came up with a pilot program to pre-treat, use liquid sodium chloride to basically pre-treat the streets. This can only be done when you're not forecasting rain prior to a snow event. Well, the efficiency is that allows for a 75% reduction in terms of the amount of salt that we're putting into the environment, and a 75% reduction in terms of what our cost is. And these costs are based and predicated upon our being able to get our own brine maker to make our own brine as opposed to having to purchase pre-made brine. talking about increased efficiencies. The alley preventative maintenance program, again, Todd and Tony have completely transformed this. Instead of doing it purely based on a service order or work order basis, where you have a complaint about a alley and you send a crew out and they basically mobilize, get the equipment out, do the alley, and then go to the next one on the list. They're doing it in a orderly fashion where if you're doing Oakland, you start at one end of Oakland and you go to the other end and you grade all of the alleys. Saves a huge amount in terms of the remobilization because you trailer them out one time and you can do 3 to 4 alleys in a day and you trailer them back at the end of the day, right? As opposed to hopscotching around the city of Topeka. The other thing that we are striving for and constantly improving is making good data-driven decisions, right? Hats off to Jason and his crew. They've done a great job in terms of the alley program that they have put together, analyzing basically the factors relative to the utilities that you have, the pavement condition, what type of businesses it serves. So you're making a good data-driven decision in terms of which alleys that we replace, because we can only afford to do about 3 or 4 a year. And so you need to have a system for doing that. Our pavement decisions in terms of the half-cent sales tax, whether it's mill and overlay, whether it's replacement, full-depth replacement, or our microsurfacing, are absolutely data-driven. The key factor that we're using is we're going off of PCI, right? So that we know which streets, and it also informs us as to what the appropriate treatment is. And then the last one is Jahan, working with Benish, has put together a comprehensive bridge assessment and management plan. So again, the idea is to be able to make good data-driven decisions as to which bridges that we rehab or replace. Then our last slide on Public Works, in terms of Jason, and I'll brag on him, has put together the most complicated spreadsheet that I have ever seen in my life. But it is a great tool in terms of, at a glance, to be able to look and see by department, by area, by council district, where all of our C-Click Fix tickets are out there. So it is a fantastic tool, and it saves a huge amount of time in terms of when did this come in, how many do we have, what's out there in terms of having that data at my fingertips. And with that, I will gladly stand for any questions relative to Public Works before we move on into the utilities.
Any questions at this point? Councilwoman Valdivia-Acala.
Thank you, Mayor. Braxton, with the 50/50 sidewalk program, is it actually what I've heard, which is the 100,000 per year, and to go to those that can't afford it, they apply if they're LMI, and that fund itself is 100,000 a year until it's exhausted?
Yes, ma'am. First come, first serve, and then
Right.
after this first year, then we will make a recommendation to the governing body as to what the funding level should be for future years.
So this obviously then is a pilot project. Have you started getting many calls or requests in? I know it hasn't been out there very long.
Gentlemen, can you quantify that? We'll get that number to you and get back to you and share that with the finance department, who will submit that to all the council members.
Okay, because I do know, I was hoping that there would be some type of, I don't think many people know about it. I've been telling my NIAs about it, and they just almost fell out of their chairs. They were so surprised that we've gone to this, which I think is excellent, and I hope that we do continue it, because we know that this is a quality of life issue. So I don't know if there's anything that we can do to kind of prop it up so that more people will be aware of it.
Gretchen and her team have done a blast with that information, and David has put together a number of great materials in terms of information.
Okay. I would just say anything that could be passed on to me as a council person so that I could spread out to my community as well, that would be appreciated. And then the other thing with the shortage of engineers, can you give me a sense about how long the shortage, this 40% shortage has been going on with Public Works? A year, more than a year?
Years.
Okay.
I can tell you on the utilities side, we've been short 4 engineers for, since 2018, 2019. On the public works side, not quite that period of time, but certainly a couple of years that we've been down those 4 engineer positions.
And do you believe it has to do anything to do with we're not offering enough pay, the package isn't good enough, nobody wants to come to Topeka? I mean, what is your sense about the continued?
The number one issue is the compensation level. I am paying substantially less than what they can pay in the private market.
And this is probably something common to municipalities, not just ours, probably.
Some municipalities have done a better job adjusting and being competitive than we have.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Copley, thank you for your presentation. This is a department that I interact with on the private side quite a bit, and I kind of wish these guys weren't here because I'm not saying this for their benefit, but we're working those guys to death. I mean, I will be corresponding with them on a project, and they'll send me something at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, a response to something, or 8 o'clock at night on a Friday because they have so many things on their plate. And I'm primarily talking about engineering there. I imagine it's the same with the street and stuff. I guess my question is, you have 158 total FTEs allotted to this department, and it looks like, I don't know, an average of maybe, it's hard to know how it's weighted, but somewhere between 35 and 50% vacancy. Does that mean we only have 80-some FTEs right now, or, 80 or 90?
We'll have to get with HR to get you a number, a good head count.
I guess my question is, if that's a long-standing thing, why can't we, these hard to find positions that have professional degrees? We have some, frankly, union positions in our city that make more than guys with professional degrees, right? And that's an issue. We need to get some parity here. If you're going to be a professional and have a license, like an attorney or a professional engineer, you need to be compensated for that, right? I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Wade.
So Councilman, part of the conversation we're going to have on August 9, I think we'll address some of what you're asking.
Okay.
That's part of what the study entailed. And so I think what you're asking right now, we'll get a lot more of that on August
Okay.
9.
I guess just something I'd be interested in, if we have, I don't know, this has to be a lot of money here that we're saving. Why can't we give those people, even if it's a one-time thing, if it's one-time bonus to help them through this time? I guess I'd be a proponent of that because I feel like we're working them to death, honestly. And
Councilman, it is a saving on salary, but on the flip side of that, it's costing us a lot more money because we have to contract with private industry.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we're looking at, a key example is a good engineer with experience should bring about $135,000, and we're paying about anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 below that. So those are things, a market adjustment that we are going to have to look at, and that is one of the things that Mr. Wade has been gingerly trying to suggest, the 10% pool. These are conversations that we're going to have to be competitive, because we are spending an astronomical amount of money, in my opinion, on consultant fees. And if we're going to spend that much on consultant fees, then we can take those dollars and invest those into new hirees and hire quality people. So those are the strategies that we're looking at.
And I guess just to beat the dead horse for one more minute here. You know, when I first started working at the city in 1989, I mean, we had, you know, Tom Flanagan, Tim Green, Sean Bruns, a younger Neil Dobler. I mean, Ken Bass was doing water. Bernie Cosby was, I forget, he was doing bridges, I think. Norm Davis. I mean, we had like the A team of engineers. I mean, I think the city staff was probably as good or maybe better than any private engineering staff. And I think we're down to like 3 or 4 people, right? It's 3 or 4 engineers.
Three and a half.
Okay. Okay. I got to ask, who's the half? No, don't answer that. I know it's a part-time person, but
It's a part-time person.
okay. I just, like I said, I just worry about that because I just worry honestly that you could burn people out over time, so, including yourself.
I share your concern.
So, okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia-Acla.
Thank you, Mayor. I would wholeheartedly agree with you, Councilman Emerson. I think that at just the level that I get the sense of folks like Tony and his crew and others are working, taking up that additional yoke that, you know, Braxton wants them to, needs them to, that we all need them to. I think that there has to be a level of appreciation more than a plaque or more than, you know, us talking about them on TV. I would definitely support as we continue this dialogue. However, whether it's at this time of budget or outside of that, to look at what we can do to show monetarily that we appreciate this commitment that they're making and we don't want to lose them. So, thank you.
Speaking of plaques, I just happen to have here Mark Schreiner's pin for his 20 years of service to the city of Topeka, as well as a pen.
You know, he was going to give you $100,000, but instead, we got you this. This is just as good. This is just as good.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Braxton, I want to go back to that 50-50 program, the 100,000 that's in there. Is that just for the sidewalks or is that for the culvert too? Piping?
The 100,000 is for the sidewalk program. That money is, the utilities is the one funding the culvert program.
And how much money is in there for the culvert program?
We do not have a dollar amount. We have established a cap of 20 culverts to be installed in any given calendar year under that program.
So there's not a line item number on that, is what you're telling me?
Yes, that is correct, ma'am.
Okay. But you're gonna install up to 20,000. I mean, not 20,000, up to 20.
Yes, ma'am. That'd be asking a little much of my staff to do 20,000 culverts.
Well, there's 20,000 that need to be done, but I'm just saying you're saying 20, so,
Yes, ma'am. We'll just have to whittle them away every year. We'll just knock out another 20.
okay, so I'll be looking to put a line item figure in there. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Miller.
Just a couple of things. One, kudos to the staff. I've been on the council now, I'm in my 14th year, and I've been asking since the first year when already street maintenance had deteriorated to the point where, I mean, people had just lost confidence in the system and so on, that there was not regular alley maintenance and there was not regular street sweeping. And we were spending all that time. I mean, you mentioned sending a truck out just to do one alley, but they also sent somebody out first to look at it, see if it needed it. And so getting back to that routine, I'm glad to hear that the calls have dropped. It's so much more efficient for the staff and the utilization of the equipment, as well as dropping that customer service time, hopefully way off. Just really appreciate hearing that on alleys and the sweeping and the snow removal plans, so way to go. I wanted to welcome Mark back. It's good to see you. It's been a long time, and good to see you back, and thanks for getting back in the saddle as soon as you could. Related to that, I was on the council and maybe the only person in the room, Sylvia's on the screen, that was on when we did the big cuts in 2010 or 2011. You were probably already at utilities, were you?
Yes, ma'am.
And we cut two engineering positions at the time, and I couldn't believe it. Of all things that we cut to reduce the budget and try and get through the anticipated recession. And it's interesting to me to see that we've never recovered from that. And so in talking about getting back not only the money, I mean, there have been the side conversations that came up today about the fact that we're spending more. I don't know if it's more than those higher salary levels to do contract work than if we hired internally. But I would suggest we may want to, if there's a critical mass, Mark could help out with that, having been on that engineering staff back then. You know, it may be that we need to bring in a class of 3 or 4 to flip it so that there's enough staff in-house to make one switch at one time rather than incremental, to have it be a place where people want to come work because there's enough people and so on. When we laid off those 2 positions more than 10 years ago now, we've never recovered from that. So.
You're correct.
Glad to hear you looking at it.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Councilman Kell.
So I was just looking over a few of the position descriptions on some of these, and have we looked at possibly maybe going to a training aspect rather than, like on the Arborist 1, it says 1 year of experience. Sometimes the experience they may get from a private company may not be the best, and then they bring those bad habits with us. So by us training them, we're actually getting them to where we want them to be. And then also, it allows someone, you know, like we're going through a trend right now of high schoolers not going to college. So we have all these high school kids that would possibly be eligible for a job like that, but without the 1 year of experience, and they're kind of eliminated. And then we're almost pushing them off to a private company now. And then if they like it there and stuff like that, they'll stay there rather than coming over here. So have we looked at maybe on certain positions eliminating the prerequisites on that, especially on the high school diploma only when it comes to the education side of things, and looked at maybe doing in-house training for those positions?
Certainly, we're open to any suggestions that you would have.
Talk to Steve, he knows how to do interns.
Yeah, I look at it as I do a lot of landscaping work, and it's a complicated thing, but it's a very easy thing once you know it. So it's just one of those things of I've been looking at things a lot this last year about the students not wanting to go to college because of the cost, and if we can start snagging some of these area high schoolers and tech school and community college kids that are from Topeka, and just keep them here and start their process through city employment, I think we could cover a lot of our shortfalls long term.
Right. Certainly, I'll have that conversation with the city forester. I will point out that because of the FLSA requirements relative to the working with chippers and chainsaws and in bucket trucks, that 18 is an absolute minimum age. We would not be able to go into any kind of high school internship in forestry or for street for that matter. Same thing because of FLSA issues.
Further questions, comments? Anyone online? Nothing further for Mr. Copley? Thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate it, Braxton.
So there's been much talk about how the police chief and fire chief are getting along well. I'll point out that the utilities director and public works director are getting along very well together as well. Never been more closely aligned. We'll kick it over to Adam to give us the financial overview of the utilities.
Yes, so for the combined, and this is on page 134 of your budget books, this summary financial information. So the total combined utility has a budget of $96.1 million. And this is the water, stormwater, and wastewater utility. In the fees for service line item is where you will find the approved rate increases. So you can see that there is an increase in that fees for service line item. So that's where you'll find the rate increases. In the other payments line item, I wanted to point out that $12 million of that line item are operating transfers to capital projects. So again, this is where we use operating funds to pay for capital projects. The utilities personnel number includes a $522,000 vacancy credit. So we've talked about vacancy credits quite a few times this evening. In the past, the utilities has not utilized a vacancy credit, and just a quick explanation, the vacancy credit is essentially an accounting maneuver that allows you to capture some of the savings that you expect to incur throughout the year from vacant positions. And so it allows to reduce the overall personnel number. Just as a reference point to where utilities has landed on personnel over the last couple of years. In 2020, they were about $420,000 under budget. 2021, $1.5 million, and 1.2 continues to trend a little bit over where 2021 is. And so we're confident that this is an appropriate number as a vacancy credit. Total FTEs is down 1 FTE, and this was the backflow inspector that was moved under the planning and development budget. And with that, I will turn it back over to Braxton.
So speaking of that FTE, I just want to make it crystal clear that KDHE requires the City of Topeka's utility department, the water utility, to have an active backflow and cross-connection program. The individual has been actually working under the planning department since 2018 with the utilities paying for that position. But the planning department has been receiving the income and the revenue from that program. So this year, with the agreement of city manager and the finance director, we transferred the position from utilities to the planning department, where honestly it should have been all along, because the revenue should follow the position. So it's a change that was done several years ago. It has been working well. That particular individual is a licensed master plumber as well, so he can pitch in and help out if there's some plumbing inspection. They've got much better administrative support for tracking these kind of things, 7,000 backflow prevention devices, than the utilities department had. So it really was the right department for that position to be in, and it has been there for several years. So I don't want you to think that this is something that is sudden or earth-shattering. Vacancy credit, the bottom line is that we are seeing substantial increases in commodities and contractual services, and our revenue level is set based on the rates that were passed in 2019. And so simply put, I have to manage a budget to come in under the amount of revenue that I have. And the way that I'm going to have to balance that is by managing vacancies to be able to accomplish what we need to do and still provide the services that we need to provide. Because I cannot cut corners in terms of treating water or treating wastewater. I need those chemicals. Just to give a quick and dirty overview, we're looking at, in terms of our total overall budget, contractual budget's up 4% and commodities up 9%. And when you're looking at a $96 million budget, that's real money. To give you some examples, the chemical costs for water and wastewater are $1 million more for 23 than 22. Fittings, hydrants, valves, 38% increase over the course of the last year. Asphalt and restoration costs, I'm almost 50% higher in terms of the last year. Next slide. So water main replacement. I had shared a memo a couple of weeks ago with the governing body in terms of where we are. We got off to a slow start initially. COVID didn't help. We are right now at just almost 13 miles that we have either completed since the rate increases went into effect, or under construction, or going out to bid. AMI, we continue to move forward with our advanced metering infrastructure. We've changed out almost 37,000 meters to date. Currently, we are capturing 83% of our meter reads by AMI, not having to rely on meter readers out there walking a beat. Culvert replacement program, we've talked a little bit about. That's a major policy change where in the past, the property owner purchased the culvert, city staff would go pick it up from the yard, take it to their house, remove the old culvert, install the new culvert. Now for those individuals that meet the LMI requirements, I have AMI on the mind, the LMI requirements, that the city will purchase the culvert for them and staff will go ahead and install the culvert at no cost. And we are limiting, because it's my staff that are doing this and they have many, many other responsibilities, we're limiting that to no more than 20 culvert installations in a year, which is basically about two a month. RNG process, renewable natural gas. We are still going through the testing phase of all of the facilities. We have pumped gas to our offtake facility. That was very short-lived because we had some sensors that went off. And so we're continuing to walk through with our contractor to get through all the punch list items so that we can get that gas sold and generate that revenue that we desperately need. So our overall goals that we have in terms of our systematic, data-driven decisions relative to the replacement of infrastructure, as well as one of our key projects is for ongoing regulatory compliance. It's to get the biological nutrient removal improvements done to the North Topeka wastewater treatment plant so that we can meet our new KDHE permit requirements for phosphorus and our new goal for nitrogen. Talk about some of the efficiencies. Staff spent a great deal of time going through Chapter 8, which is the water line specifications relative to water line installation. And we've identified areas that we can do cost savings, and that the two big ones that we've made are we're now allowing compact versus full body fittings, basically the amount of how beefy the fitting is. We're looking at approximately a 25% reduction by going with the compact versus full body. And then we've also made a significant change in terms of our bedding requirements for native soils that are silt or sand. We're not requiring bedding. For areas that are clay, we have reduced the amount of bedding from 30 to 50%, depending on whether it's what the size of the pipe, as well as whether it was in rock or not. Interest savings. In the past, the utilities have been almost exclusively have used 30-year utility revenue bonds. And that's because we have been able to usually get very close to the interest rate that the KDHE state revolving loan funds would offer because of our credit worthiness. Also, the 30 years allows for that interest, that principal and interest, to be spread out over a greater period of time, reducing the amount of payment. Currently, what we are seeing is that if we were to go to the markets this summer or early fall, we're looking at 4 to 5% interest rate. We should be able to lock in a KDHE SRF loan somewhere closer to 2%. So the savings is going to be significant if we pursue this. So basically, you're looking at a $5 million net present value savings by going with the 20-year SRFs at approximately 2% versus a 30-year revenue bond. Obviously, anywhere that we can save money, we're taking advantage of that. Again, we've already talked about our partnering with Public Works on the snow removal. We've also had a program that's now been in place for almost a year where utilities and Public Works have been partnering on a commercial driver's license development program. This goes directly to what Councilmember Kell was asking earlier. Do we have to have a CDL as a requirement for a job, or can we provide the training to bring someone in off the street that doesn't have the CDL, get them trained, and then get them into that position? And so that's what we're doing through in the street as well as in WPC and water by having this joint CDL training program. And then just overall, we're looking at a 17% vacancy rate throughout the utilities. Most notably, we are at distribution, 32% vacancy in terms of field staff, and then WPC maintenance, which is mostly plant and pump station maintenance, we're looking at about a 33% vacancy in that area. So service level improvements. One of the game changers in my world has been moving to contracted out site restorations for our repairs in the dirt. We call them dirt restorations. I can tell you it's been about a year now, a little over. The number of calls that I get has dropped dramatically. I used to get blown up on a weekly basis. Someone would say, there has been a crater in my yard for 3 months, or 6 months, or 7 months. And now we are, generally speaking, our goal is to get them knocked out within 30 days. I can't think of the last time that I had a call relative to a dirt site restoration. AMI, so going to this technology is great, but what does it give us? So my challenge to staff is, so it's great that we don't have to go out and read meters, but what are we doing with those staff? How are we becoming more efficient? And the real answer is we've reduced about 5,000 truck rolls in terms of what we had to do in terms of going out. Usually these are a turn on or turn off that we just need to capture a meter reading. We can now do that through AMI. And so that's allowed us to make staff available to do things like lead service line investigations, as well as we have completely amped up our large meter program. So these meters are cash registers. They are capturing the flow of water, and that translates into dollars. And so if those cash registers are not working properly, they're running too slow, we're not capturing the revenue that we're entitled to. And so all 206 large meters have been hit this year, and then our 19 highest ones, which are over 1 million gallons, right, have been hit twice during the year, so that we make sure that these meters are functioning properly and capturing that information. So on our call center, just a couple things I want to talk about. If I get to the right page in my presentation. The single sign-on for e-bill and auto pay. We've had some issues with our service provider, and we're now looking at mid-August for that. At the time we wrote this, we thought we'd have it done, and then on the IVR, accepting all payment types, we're now looking at the fourth quarter of the year to be able to have that implemented. And then I just want to make an announcement that we still have $40,000 of utility rate refund money available. So if you're eligible for the homestead sales tax refund, then you're eligible for the utility refund. So I just want to make sure, a lot of times we run out during the year, but we still have at this tick of the clock, 40,000 available, so that the public are aware of that to be able to get applications in. And with that, I will gladly stand for any questions relative to the utilities.
question for Mr. Copley. Councilwoman Hiller.
On page 135, in the performance measures for water, there are some pretty big numbers of gallons of fresh water distributed for 20 and 21, and then NA for 22 and 23, and the same for the number of calls received by the call center. I figure they're not giving away water anymore, and maybe that's what that one is, but is that an error, or what's up with the call center?
We'll have to look into that and get you an answer why there's nothing out there in terms of potential target for those years.
Yeah, actually, I'm looking at it again. That's actually the water that goes to people's houses, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I didn't think you'd contracted out the call center, so,
No, ma'am.
thank you.
Further questions for Braxton?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I've been working really close with the call center. I'm really pleased with it. They will text you when your bill is due, and they will also text you a confirmation. I think that's great. They did fix it, so now that my check, I can pay by check and it's on file, so I think that's great, Braxton. I kind of sat here and did some math on the culverts. I'm not real happy with that, but I will meet with you this week to sit down. To have one culvert done twice a month, we are so behind on those. And again, we need to educate the public on that money's in there. So I want to see how we can get more monies in there and get more done. Because when it rains over here in District 3 and District 4 and District 2, there's areas that flood. And it's because of those culverts, that they're not properly installed in there. So it was heart-wrenching to me to say, well, we're only going to do 2 a month when we need more. And I can tell you up and down my street, I catch the brunt of it because I'm on the corner. I did do a ride-through with Sylvia Davis. I don't know if those notes got back to you, but I will make sure that you have that, Braxton. But I think it's something I want to sit down and chat with you about. I feel like we're not moving forward on that, and I think that's something that we need to move forward on. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment or questions? Councilman Kell?
I just want to thank Braxton for running 2 departments for about the last 6 months and being progressive and innovative during this time frame, and just not kind of trying to manage but push ahead, especially with also with the manpower issue that he's working with also. So I appreciate that, and he hasn't completely just lost it. But I appreciate all the hard work you have done and your departments have done.
Thank you. I give the credit all to my staff. We've got a great team of employees throughout utilities and public works that really are the ones that deserve the credit.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Braxton. And I'm glad you're getting along with the Public Works Director too. That's good, having lunch together and so forth. That's good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll move on to, I think, court.
We're done.
So,
Do we have time?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think, City Manager, I think we're good to call it.
Good?
We moved him to Tuesday night.
Okay, all right then.
I think we're good.
Well, thank you all for the presentations. We do have the need for an executive session this evening, if the city attorney would read.
The motion would be to recess into executive session not to exceed 1 hour to discuss individual candidates for city manager pursuant to KSA 7543-19B1. The open meeting will resume in the Cyrus Holiday room that we're in. The following individuals may be needed to assist the governing body in its deliberations: Paul Bossert and Patty Millard from T Staffing and City Attorney Stanley.
Okay? You've heard the need for an executive session.
Move approval.
Move to approve by Councilman Emerson. Is there a second?
I'm sure Councilwoman Ortiz.
Councilwoman Hannah Nager seconds it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Sylvia, thank you. We're adjourned, and we'll move right into the executive session.
Possession with intent to distribute.
How you feel, Spencer?
I think it's a summer cold. Like another test.
Okay,
just-
we
We are live and coming out of our executive session where no action has been taken. But we do have one item yet to address for the governing body. Councilman Kell.
Mr. Mayor, I move to direct key staffing to proceed with further vetting of applicants and scheduling interviews as appropriate.
Okay. Have a motion and a second by Councilman Emerson. We don't have anyone to take the roll call vote, so we'll take a,
I have it. I
Okay.
can do it if you want it.
all right, I just want
I
to
don't
make
remember
sure.
first.
Ms. Stanley.
Oh wait, anybody have a pen?
Oh, yes.
No, but I have a rubber band.
You can
start with us
since
we Sorry.
submitted the motion.
Councilwoman Ortiz,
My vote would be no.
Councilman Emerson,
Yes.
Councilman Kell,
Yes.
Councilwoman Nager,
Yes?
Councilman Dobler,
He's
We
on.
couldn't hear you.
He's trying to.
Yes.
Councilman Duncan,
Yes.
Councilman Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Councilwoman Hiller,
Yes.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Yes.
Okay, 9 voting in favor, 1 opposed, the motion passes.
Motion is passed, and you're directed to do as requested in our motion. If there's no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.